Men are extraordinary. Great men are extraordinary. Masculinity is aspirational. It's something that healthy, empowered masculinity is such a beautiful and rare thing. I truly believe that the reclamation of honorable masculinity and the pursuit of that, the aspirational pursuit of becoming an extraordinary man, has the power and is absolutely essential to redirect society towards something that we can look forward to rather than so many of us feel that we're going in the wrong trajectory. I believe it's men's responsibility to turn that ship around and to create something different.
Welcome to Transform. I'm your host, Jason Drees. It's great to see you here this week, and I'm excited this is a different type of episode than we normally have. Normally, I'm coaching other people. Normally, I'm doing monologue, but today I have one of my coaches on the show with me today. And I'm going to read you his bio. So Nathan Wakeford is a visionary entrepreneur and masculinity coach. And his unique coaching blends subconscious reprogramming, business strategy, and trauma resolution to create optimal clarity, alignment, discipline, and momentum. Often described as a transformational magician, Nate has also a foundation in holographic NLP, family constellations, masculine rites of passage, and blah, blah, blah. But I'll just got to say that I've been in professional coaching for 15 years now, and he's probably one of the top 3 coaches I've ever worked with. He has some magical stuff we're working through. So, Nate, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you, brother.
How are you? You?
I'm good. Yeah. Beautiful.
You're in Tulum, Mexico?
In paradise. As close to it.
Awesome. Well, I'm in Austin, Texas. We got a little overcast today, so it's not so hot, which is good. Did you have a good Halloween down there?
I'm Australian. Halloween's still a forethought for me.
You're like, what is that? Okay,
yeah, it's
awesome.
like a bunch of guys running around in costumes holding up pumpkins. But yeah, I'm Aussie.
That's funny. Yeah. All right. So let's this is funny. I've never really interviewed anybody before. So we'll go from this. So, we'll have just a conversation, see where it goes, coach to coach to client. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your life journey, and like kind of what has brought you to your work.
So I have a corporate background initially. I went straight out of uni into a corporate career, and because that was kind of the aspirational path to take. And I went from there into like learning the basis of big business. And so I knew, however, from my first interview that I wanted to start my own company. I got into, and I was a bit of a smart cookie, you'd say, through university and high school. Like I did very well. I was in the top 5% perhaps of the university for my year levels. And it wasn't until I started my own business that I recognized I didn't necessarily have what I needed to succeed in business, right? So I went from, exceeds high honors levels at marketing at one of the top Australian universities to really having the idea that I've got no idea what I'm doing in business, having studied entrepreneurship and having, all this background of success. And that really threw me for 6, it set me then on a path of personal development. So I went deep into all the typical channels, learning about Robert Kiyosaki and Cashflow Quadrant and E-Myth and Michael Gerber and all this sort of the preliminary reading that so many people go through when they first start a business and realize they don't know what they're doing, and that the university didn't prepare them for anything in the real world. So I did, went through a lot of studies. Anthony Robbins, who I know you've got a background with, at his whole Mastery University. And eventually I started to get some traction, and about 3 years into my business was growing quite quickly. I ended up building a global beverage company that was one of the largest privately owned tea companies in Australia. But early on in that chapter, my mother passed away, and she had been a huge foundation for me in my starting my business, and an emotional support. And when she passed, it really brought me back to, what is important in life and relationships. I've been very success focused, but not so much people and relationship focused. And when she passed away, it was a huge reset for me. And it was the start of what became a spiritual awakening. And in no disrespect to my father, I recognized at that stage, when I did a masculine rite of passage, that I was missing some fundamental elements of what it is to be an empowered man. And I met some of the most powerful men that I've ever met on that first initiation. And that was magic to me. And I was like, wow, these guys are just incredible. And I got shown what masculine love is. Now that was, I'd been in a corporate background, very business focused, and all of a sudden I get introduced to shamanic concepts and rites of passage, and the personal development went from reading books into the deep inner work that I now obviously am a huge proponent of. And at that weekend, that first initiation, I met my first coach who was trained in NLP and a specific type of NLP. There's many different types. This is like a holographic NLP through some guys called NLP Marin. After about 18 months of being coached with him and seeing dramatic changes in my business, I'm like, I want to learn how to do this myself. I want to be able to coach people. And that set me on about a 13-year journey of really understanding how to rewire the subconscious mind. And it was my own healing journey that was the motivation. I saw the changes within me. And as you might know in coaching, often when you have your own transformational moment, that becomes a resource that you can share with other men. And masculinity, I started to see, was intertwined with dominance, authority, leadership, and there's a foundational quality of your presence that comes through beyond your skill set, And so from a shy school, small country town of 150 people or thereabouts, complete nerd, couldn't smile in photos. I had so much insecurity in myself and was so protected by a loving but very protective mother that I didn't have any really connection with women. And all of a sudden, through that journey of coming into my power, into my masculinity, that changed for me as well. And so through that process, I began to understand that men could be made. If I could start off in those positions of lacking confidence, and I could become not only one of the top key persons of influence in my industry, and I could become more successful attracting, a partner, and I could become a stronger leader. I really, I think I've gone through so much adversity to then come into a place of empowerment. And I realize as well that there's cycles. You learn something and then you feel you've mastered it, and then all of a sudden you reach the next level, the next potentiality, and you essentially become a beginner again. And so I've done enough of those cycles now that I think I'm getting pretty good at some of the distinctions of what's needed to transport yourself through each stage.
So you had mentioned an empowered man. Like, how do you describe an empowered man? And you've also talked to me about a high-valued man, empowered man. I'm curious how you describe that.
So an empowered man to me is a man of internal authority. So he has authority over his world. That covers a lot of different topics. He essentially is able to intentionally create his reality. That's a core component. That's where it incorporates elements of manifestation. But there's a high degree of self-mastery. And so from that place of internal authority, he's really the commander-in-chief for his reality. He's not submissive to any external authority. And he also has an internal frame of reference, meaning he's not reactive to the outside world. He's responsive. He chooses to respond in a way that he knows will bring him closer to the outcome, and in a way that's integrous and aligned with his truth. And so that takes a lot to get to a man to that stage, to develop the ability to be non-reactive. And essentially it means growing up the little boy from within into a man. And we have so many little boys trapped in men's bodies that are emotionally reactive. And that can result from even very healthy family contexts where mothers do an amazing job, but where we once had a rites of passage that took, if a mother takes a baby to a boy, the father's job is to take the boy into the man. And we've lost that stage of development for so many men. So my mission became that, was to develop this concept of the extraordinary man by optimizing this man's identity so that he becomes more effective in his role, his masculine role, which is to protect, provide, lead, and serve his family, his community, and himself.
Yeah, the state of masculinity today is kind of sad, and
unfortunately,
and because as I'm working with you and as I'm going through the ending of my marriage, it's very clear that one of the big contributors to my marriage ending was me being a boy. Mm-hmm. And I was, and the thing that was challenging for me is that I gave it everything I could. Like, I just didn't know any differently. And I gave it all the energy, all the effort, all the work, and it still just didn't work. because there was a core thing about me that was not right. And that just affected everything. And as much as sad as I am that this chapter is coming to a completion, I now understand that the limitations and the behaviors and stuff I had in that relationship was an identity that was attached to that relationship. So there was no way we could have progressed without separating. Now, will we get back together in the future? I don't know, possibly. But realizing that like I had to go down this journey, and it's hard because, I feel like I've been going through an origin story again this year. The business has been hard. Revenue has been hard to generate. Income's down, and then hit with this on top of it. It's just been a fucking challenge. And working with you, I think we're on like week 5 or something like that, maybe 6. It's just radically made a massive impact on me. And the surprising thing that I'm just getting out of it, besides like standing on nail boards and icing my balls and stuff like that,
we're going everywhere in this interview. Wait for it.
Going everywhere. Yes. It's been, it was an area that was lacking. And I realized that in the past I was constantly seeking comfort, release, relaxation. But as the more I work with you and the more I read about masculinity, I realize the nature of masculinity is to work. It's to push against resistance. Right.
100%.
And I kind of got sidetracked because from my Tony Robbins coaching, which was my mindset coaching, performance coaching, which is basically forced accountability coaching, which is straight up get them into grinding, and moving into the alignment space, what I've been for the past few years, where it's all about avoid resistance, get into flow. I realized that has creeped into far too many areas of my life. And since I've brought back that morning routine, waking up at 4:44 a.m. and just like, it's just radically shifted my foundation. And so has lifting weights. Like men have to lift heavy weights. You have to. It's such a thing for that. So what's your take on masculinity today in the world? And like, what do you see? And how are there lots of empowered men? Are there not empowered men? Like, are they out there?
Well, you've touched on so many points that I want to address and bring in. And one is the concept that many men don't know what a man is or how to become more masculine. And what's even worse, and this leads into what's happening in society today, is that many men think that becoming more masculine, the version of masculinity that they're choosing, is actually feminized masculinity. They're falling within a feminine frame of authority, and they're trying to please the feminine. They think that the more that they become a dutiful man that meets every wish, command of the feminine, every expectation, the more they'll be rewarded in that role. But the reality couldn't be farther from the truth. What that actually does is often pushes the woman away, places her on a pedestal, such that by her hypergamous nature, she can't look up to you anymore. And, the lessons that I'm sharing with you are the lessons that I hard learned myself. So, and what you just touched on then is the comfort. I had built a multi-million-dollar business, a global business. I didn't really have to work that hard anymore. I got to pay to travel. I got, pretty much all my expenses covered, and I was in a place of comfort. And as a man, that's one of the most problematic places you could find yourself, because it means that you're no longer leaning in.
Comfort. Yes.
Yeah. You're not leaning into anything that's pressing on you. You're not leaning into growth. The presence of discomfort tells you, just like when you go to a gym, if you're in discomfort, your muscles are growing. And the thing about it, what I call the masculine frame, is it requires constant maintenance, and it has to be continuously improved. And that's a beautiful, element to masculinity, is that men are made, and the moment that you're not making yourself into the better version of yourself, you're in decline, you're in atrophy. So this, the state of the affairs of where we are in society is a feminized version of masculinity. And it's a submissive and compliant and highly emotionally reactive version of masculinity, which is far from true masculinity. Because an empowered man has the ability to bring order to chaos. And a highly emotionally reactive man adds to the chaos. He doesn't have the ability to separate himself from the circumstance or event. An empowered man chooses his response because he can choose how he communicates, and he's not bound by his emotional reactivity. And he has a very clear outcome that he's moving the environment towards, because he knows where he's going and what he stands for. In the feminized version of masculinity, It's all about opening up, becoming more heart connected, becoming more emotional. And it's very much about this is the way a man's meant to behave. And it's by that very nature, it's a man conforming, right, to external reference points. Yet an empowered man doesn't have that. He has his divine connection with God. He knows why he's here, what he's here to create, and he moves towards that. And he invites the feminine into his reality rather than stepping into the feminized reality where he's no longer actually orientated around his own North Star. He's actually orientated around pleasing the feminine. And over time, the feminine will lose respect for a man who does that. So much of what we're told sends us down the wrong path.
That's exactly what happened to me. That's exactly what happened, and what I'm noticing though is I'm noticing that masculinity we're being called right now by life. We're being called out, right? I don't know if you've read the book, The Fourth Turning. Have you heard of that book? And like, I forget the exact phase, but the phase we're in right now is the one that where gender gets all confused. But the chapter, the phase after that, which I think was it 2028 or 2032, is basically the heroes come back, where the rising masculinity. And I could see it, me and other men I know, like, we're just like, we want to be masculine. We don't know why we're this way, but we've all been raised by women and we've been taught to be a nice guy. So we've basically been taught to put this feminine mask over our masculine core. And then women today, they've been fed a bunch of shit too. Like, you don't need a man anymore. You can have babies on your own. So they put on a masculine mask over their feminine core. And then there's no polarity in the attraction. The relationship dies,
Right. 100%.
So, and I've been learning a lot about, like, it's hard to be a man. It is. I'm realizing it's hard to be a man because one of the brutal truths I've realized lately is that your value as a man is based on what you provide.
Mm-hmm. One of the aspects. I would say it's even harder to be a weak man.
Yeah, it's culturally though, right? Like, it's like, if you don't provide, then that's,
But on that note, like, I want to emphasize a point there. It's hard to be a man. Agreed, without question.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be a weak man. If you're a weak man in today's society, you've got no dating options. Society frowns upon you. You'll be shamed. You're not standing up for yourself. You're going to feel that, like many men do, even more pressure placed on you in your non-performance. You're often shamed, and you're not celebrated. Masculinity in society is very seldom celebrated today. Yet it's very much in demand once you become that high-value man. So the path to becoming that high-value, strong, effective man is very difficult. It basically requires you to continuously lean into discomfort, to be willing to be judged, to be willing to be rejected, to be ridiculed,
disliked.
Disliked. I've experienced all of it. And there's a swing that once you realize you have a high degree of immunity to any of that, to any external reference point, then you're just filled by your own goodness. You're filled by your own self-love. And then eventually the reflections started to come back to you in a positive way, but when we're in this transitionary phase of realizing that, shit, there's a bunch of stuff we don't know. We've been misled around a bunch of it as well. And when you finally get the right trajectory, then you realize, shit, I have to face everything I've been avoiding for all this time. I have to take full responsibility for everything in my life. And then I have to lean into every part of my discomfort. And then I have to go to a complete identity death where everything that I thought that was important to me, everything that I built my character and identity on, that's all going to be taken. All of my external frames of reference that I'd built my value up, my business, my relationship, my health, everything, it all gets wiped. And then the beautiful thing is I think this is a Chinese word that says that the equivalent of crisis is the same word as opportunity. So it's literally when everything's dissolved and falls away from you is actually at the point where you can get into alignment and come into your own path of empowerment.
Yeah. Well, I remember I texted you a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, Nathan, I don't know who, I feel like I'm losing who I am. And it scared me, right? Because other side of that was unknown. And then you replied, and you're like, well, yeah, that's the old identity dying. You have to go through that death. And I was like, holy shit. And I could see how much of the struggle and challenge as I've been going through this divorce has been attached to that identity. And when and you've helped me get kind of grounded in the new identity, and also you have some magical tools that help clean up what makes that old identity in place. But when I'm tapping into the new one, it's just like, I feel like an entirely different person. It's just like radically different. So tell me a little bit about culturally, how guys see masculinity wrong. Like, what are they fed today that's bullshit, that's making things worse?
Well, I want to take us down a dark hole first about how we arrived here. So there's a subversive attack on masculinity that has to be called out, has to be mentioned, that is born out of honestly, like, I'm all for for true authentic feminism, but I'm not at all a proponent for the feminist movement. And for me, I'm a very much, increasingly as I go along this path, very much a traditionalist. So what's happened is through porn, through shaming, so much of these movements, which were meant to be feminist or feminine, I should say, empowerment movements, were orientated around the degradation of the virtue and value and ability of men. So in other words, we push you down in order to lift ourselves up, but that's an unsustainable, trajectory to take us on. And it's ultimately what results in destroying the family unit, which is what I think is one of the fundamental things that can actually restore society back out of our devolution into an evolutionary path.
Yeah, the family unit is definitely being attacked. Definitely.
Destroyed, and it's where, women are told, and the legal systems are built to support separations and make it attractive to do so. There's just so much, and this is a deep topic. But I guess what I'm saying is where this all originates is there's an intentional subversive movement, which is a form of Marxist communism, and if you look to start to research where this has happened before, this is how you degrade a society, is you weaken and disempower men, you make true masculinity something that's no longer virtuous, no longer honorable, no longer aspirational, and you start to destroy the family unit, and you start to hypersexualize youth, you start to remove all morality, remove all standards, and then you've got a weak population, and then you start to move them towards comfort where everything's provided, and you no longer have to work for something. So that's where we are. And so where society is, so this is no blame for me. This is just seeing it for what it is. And my mission then is, if I want to create a healthy environment for my family, a healthy community, what I recognize is that I need to become a strong man, and I need to start attracting strong men close to me. And so what the lie that men have been sold essentially is, it goes beyond that they've been sold a lie. There's been, if you look to the assault on sexuality, on what they're trying to even confuse what a man and a woman is, right? So if you can imagine, from the time you're born, you're confused about what masculinity is. They don't even need to sell you a lie. You don't even know who you're meant to be in this world and what your role is. And so when you start to realize and take full responsibility for your existence and your role as a man to protect, provide, and serve, and if you start to recognize that men are made and that you want to optimize your experience as a man, then you start to explore, well, what do I need to become a man, and where am I falling short of that? So in these areas, for instance, and then this is wide, you've got, if you think physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, sexually, financially, there's certain expectations that men have. And in a physical sense, we've become weak. We've been in that place of comfort. We no longer perceive threats. We're not protectors anymore. We don't have to hunt. We don't know how to provide. This, I'm talking general sense of general society. Of course, there's men who are absolutely great protectors. There's men who are great hunters. There's all of that. But in a general sense, society's been devolved in our need to do this because everything's provided for us. And so if you think of where men are falling short, well, men are falling short in all of those areas, and increasingly so. When it comes to the mentality, you've got highly reactive men that are adding to chaos, that don't stand for truth, that aren't willing to risk their comfort to stand for a cause, that aren't willing to risk ridicule or, to stand for where society could be going. Instead, we have keyboard warriors that hide behind screens and not meet things, man to man, and willing to place them out. And those men who do stand up, they realize they're going to risk having their credibility, their status to be tarnished if they do stand for something against what the narrative is that's leading society down this path of weakness. So to extend beyond that, in the context of relationship, we've been through the goddess movement and all this sort of stuff. We've been told to put women above us and to be highly emotional and to be compliant, when that goes against our very primal nature. And if you like, we've become domesticated to the point that we no longer have connection to that primal nature. We don't, and we've been told that we can't be aggressive, that aggressiveness is bad, that the very nature of wanting to solve problems is bad, that men are not valued, that women don't need men. There's just so many narratives all to degrade masculinity. And so the more compliant to that narrative you are, the less effective as a man you are. So if you want to look at any of the social narratives right now, the more compliant you are, the more that you are moving away from what would be empowering to you, your family, and your community.
Yes, and that's so clear. So let's make this a little bit clearer. So how would you describe, say, the mindset and perspective of an average man today compared to an empowered man, on how they see the world, how they interact with women, how they start with the cultural average today?
Well, the disempowered man is going to be a victim. He's going to blame the environment. He's going to blame the circumstance. He's going to blame his relationship. He's going to blame the women in the way that they're treating them. He's not going to take responsibility for anything. He's also not going to be integrous. He's not going to keep his agreements. He's also not going to reach far from outside of himself. He's going to try and make himself smaller to fit in, to not risk ridicule, judgment. He's also if he's going to switch, he's going to check out. He's no longer going to be pursuant of women. And if you look at so much of what society now in terms of role models goes, they're very feminine men. They're no longer strong. They're no longer of stature. And they have high-pitched voices. They're highly theatrical, highly emotive. And they're puppets, They're just playful puppets or puppies. Whereas that's where society is leading us. Now, if you look at where masculinity could be going, or what would be a more empowered version, it's a man who has purpose, who wants to shape society, who takes pride and honor both in his masculine core and how to develop that masculine core, and also his role in society. So he becomes very effective at generating revenue, becoming financially successful, knowing how to fight, becoming physically dominant. So that's a process where many men become dominant, whereas so much of today's society, men are submissive. He learns how to moderate his emotions instead of being reactive. So many men are highly reactive. He takes pride, as I said, in his masculinity. So many men are showing up to be increasingly more feminine, in fact, dressing like women. And they don't this is the other thing that many men don't even realize. Their testosterone levels are dropping. There's this assault on the very core of what helps us to become dominant, powerful, strong men. And through the presence of endocrine disruptors, xenoestrogens, things like that, there's this just abhorrent circumstances right now where men's testosterone levels and their sperm counts are like half of what they used to be like 30 to 40 years ago. Don't quote me on these stats, but you can just look at it in Google. They're just being obliterated. And that's very, very specific, in my opinion, to weaken men. So what you'll find is the men who are on that path, they're eating junk foods, they're eating things which are diminishing testosterone levels, which makes them weak, compliant men. They often start developing physical breasts or overhanging belly. They don't take care of themselves physically. They'll sit at home and lack purpose and direction instead of going, this is how I'm going to shape and contribute to the world. And so they then stop becoming powerful leaders. They start becoming compliant, puppets, if you like, to whatever external influences tell them they should be. So their strategy then is increasingly how to become even more compliant rather than what am I willing to stand for.
Yeah. Yes. So let's take a look at the opposite side right now. So what is the modern average feminine woman fed that's bullshit, not true, and it's also making different. What do you think some of the points of view that they carry that are not compared to it could compare? Oh, actually, and then also what is an empowered version of the feminine?
All right. Beautiful. So I think that feminine have been sold a lie. And what that is to seek outside the family unit. It's no longer aspirational to be a great mom or to take care of a home. Many women fall into the idea that their value is about what they can succeed in competition to men. So their level of success is based on how much pay can they get relative to men in society. It's independence rather than being connected to a man and having loyalty. You're having sexual liberation and freedom when you sleep with as many people as possible. You've got a situation where you're the goddess. There isn't a god above you. And so there's this distortion, what I call the distorted masculine I would describe as a feminized masculine. The distorted feminine is a masculinated woman, right? And so she becomes very disconnected from the rhythms of her feminine nature. She's taught to override them. She attempts to become more assertive and unconsciously seeks to compensate for a weak man. And then she's taught that men are not valuable. They don't serve a valuable role in supporting her well-being. And she's trying to place herself as an equal or above the masculine. Now, all this runs counter to what we see in nature in the vast majority of circumstances, and runs counter to what would actually be a fulfilling existence for women. It's turning women against their biological nature. See, most women will say they want a dominant man, and yet they don't want to conform to that dominance. They want to be independent. They want to be self-determinant. Those qualities are not feminine qualities. Now, I'm not saying you can't be a woman with some elements of it, but...
And one of the things about my marriage that's ending is like, there was always a competition between us.
Right.
And she was very difficult to lead because she's very independent. Super independent. And what I've been learning a lot, is the nature of masculine and feminine is masculine leads feminine. That's
right.
That's the order. That's the order. But as men, we've just not been given the examples on how to do that. And I think it kind of comes out in the wrong way. If it doesn't come out in an authentic way, it can come out bad and it can be controlling or whatever. But it's like, but the thing that I think most people don't understand is that masculine, feminine, the interaction between them is like an automatic biological response, right? Like for example, I when I tell women this, a lot of times they don't believe me, but I'm like, there are times when I see, let's say I'm in a coffee shop and I see a physically attractive woman. Maybe she's a 10 out of 10. She walks in, but she's masculine. Like I have zero attraction to her whatsoever.
Uh-huh.
And then I can watch a woman come in who may be a 6 out of 10. Maybe she's a little heavier, but she's wearing a dress. She's got perfume on. Her hair's long. And you're just like, you can't take your eyes off her, And
she's softer. She's connected to her feminine magnetism. So the feminine is receptive to the masculine. Masculine penetrates. The masculine creates foundation, creates space for the feminine to come into her aliveness. If the feminine is trying to focus most of energy on building and constructing the container, she can't surrender and allow herself to soften into being held. So ironically, women are fighting for all these things. They're fighting for financial independence. They're fighting for status and all this sort of stuff. Yet they could be all given to them. They could just be in the enjoyment of it. And if they channel their energy into lifting up the masculine, so the masculine would better provide for the feminine. And if she focused on creating home and connection inside that home and polarity and put a focus on the relationship instead of a focus on building her financial success, then I think we've been a very different society. But we're being educated that, like I said, the ideals, the aspirations are not how to be an amazing partner, how to learn. And I learned, can't look at it right now, but actually maybe I can. In one of my stories today, I thought there was a very interesting, statement.
It's interesting that you say that about the financial independence, because one of the conversations I had with my ex is, she's like, I just can't be in a relationship right now because I need to take care of myself financially first.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, I've been the sole provider for 10 plus years, and it was really interesting, that perspective that she was locked in on. I can't do it right now. I've got to figure out how to make money and support myself. I'm like,
you're right.
So it was just
because a woman does have a need for security, right?
Sure.
They do. And that, so I don't want to create the circumstance that men aren't responsible if they want to take their role seriously. They need, it's a lot more difficult to do, but it's still a reality. Like, men have to be a provider, in my opinion. That's part of our inherent nature. Can there be but the rents, the exponential devaluation of our currencies in terms of its value, there's so much that is stacked against us where, being a provider role has become more difficult. And yet that's why extraordinary men have a much better standing than weak men. But the reality is I don't know, again, this is a statistic, something by 2030, more than half of women will be single. So what we're going to is going to be a balancing. If we've been elevating that the feminine is to put on a pedestal, but they have all these high expectations, but they don't have to be great partners. They don't have to provide in the feminine way into the relationship.
Do their part. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
What you're going to have is the high value men are going to say, I'm going to choose a woman who has that softness still, who's managed to keep or maintain that. A woman who amplifies me with her presence, as opposed to competes against me, as opposed to does not only takes from the relationship, rather invests into the relationship. And so there's going to be a balancing out. And I feel empathy for the feminine because they've been just as misguided as we have. So there's not that I'm not seeing a competition between the masculine. I'm just wanting a restoration of the natural order and dynamic that would create thriving in relationships. And I'm saying the only thing that I can really do, I can't take responsibility for the feminine, but I can take responsibility for the masculine. I can groove myself to become an extraordinary man with a deep love and appreciation of the feminine, to take my role seriously, to protect, provide, lead, and serve in a way which is empowering to us both. And I can choose not to fall into the false feminine frame of authority, but maintain my own and not be emotionally reactive, but bring order to the chaos, because I believe we are going into times of chaos where authentic masculinity is going to be prized even more. So, and like you said before, we're being called forward. There's men that are waking up. And we're, whether it's, in my case, I went through a similar thing to you. I went through a relationship, a separation. It cost me a bunch of money. I went into another relationship, even after having done 19 years, 20 years of masculine development. I still realized there was bits that I was missing. And this all relates to what I'm teaching now, this masculine frame, and then the rite of passage that's required to give the distinction so men know how to behave in certain circumstances and have a North Star for how they would continue to develop themselves into that empowered masculinity.
Yeah. So why don't you explain for me what a masculine frame is and how you build it?
Right. That's a good question. So I mentioned at the start of our little discussion about having an internal frame of reference and developing internal authority. The way you build it is you come back to yourself and you start to make yourself a priority. So you start to work on building up your esteem and you're building up your self-confidence, and you stop reaching for things externally to compensate for that lack of esteem, whether that's drugs, alcohol, porn, or even sex addictions, any of that. You come back to yourself. So for me, the way that you build it is through disciplined self-care. And you pattern interrupt anything that's going to be creating comfort, and you start to lean into all your resistances. The pattern interrupt will expose what you've been reaching for to compensate for your weakness, or for your avoidance of pain. And so when you come into disciplined self-care, and I recommend getting up before 5 a.m. So anyone inside, because I'm coaching, is going to be up at 4:45 or earlier. And the first hours of the day are towards developing yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And so you will develop a stronger frame of mind getting up early. You get into breath work, meditation. You start to increase your testosterone levels. You're standing on nail boards. You're leaning into discomfort. You started to get clear on what is important to you. What do you value? What is your purpose, your mission? And so you're orientating yourself first of what's important to me, where am I going in life? And then you start to build yourself in, and I call this identity optimization. You're choosing who you wish to become in a relationship to the impact that you'd like to make in the world. And then you start surrounding yourself with men. So many men, especially married men, spend all their time in the relationship and with very little exposure to men who are on that heightened trajectory that to become and empowering themselves, right? And so having that exposure to men, and in my case, younger men, being around men who are still on that path to proving themselves, I can share my wisdom and guidance while still be challenged to keep pace with them, because some of these guys are just extraordinary in their fitness and things like that. And so then reclaiming the primal nature, the aggressiveness of the killer within. So I'd been vegan for 17, 18 years. I then started eating meat again. I started lifting heavy weights, as you mentioned. I started boxing and doing mixed martial arts. So kickboxing. And so those primal things that bring us back into that protector. And the other thing is I got clear about, how I wish to contribute to the world. And for me to create that sense of home. And that was ultimately what led me on this path. Was I recognized that I was not the leader that I thought I was, even though I'd built a multinational business, and that I was missing that charismatic confidence and the magnetism of a man on a mission who knows his worth will just radiate and exude. So when you, even the last thing was, as I lost weight, I lost about 13 kilograms in 4 months. I became really strong. I got my six pack. I started getting, a lot of interest from the feminine again. That all contributes into what you think is possible for yourself. And I know that, recently I shared the trajectory that I'm on now, which on the other side of that dissolution of my identity is now an exponential trajectory that is far beyond what my previous identity would have considered possible. So that's why I'm suggesting a rite of passage or some path that you can follow to sequentially build the different aspects and areas of your life to get clear on who you wish to craft yourself to become as a man, and have that align with the North Star of your, whatever it is going to be deeply fulfilling for you in life, your purpose, your mission, your why of your existence.
Yeah, that was, and your explanation of the masculine frame this time actually just shifted something for me, because when you said you build your masculine frame through disciplined self-care, and I realized how I had been running the morning routine lately was running the morning routine because I'm supposed to, expecting results to come from it. And what I realize right now is that the masculine frame comes from intentionally choosing to do that work that's hard and difficult and do it consistently.
Precisely.
And the other thing that stood out to me is, like, I think one trait of an empowered man is that they prioritize themselves. And it's kind of crazy how rare that is, because, like, you've been helping me unwind a lot of blocks that I've had mentally. And it's just like, I was like last on the list, make everybody else happy. And then I would feel good about myself because I was so externally framed,
I don't want to talk about some of the things you said, but honestly, I'm looking at it from the outside going, so you're living outside, you're not giving yourself anything. If you look to nature knows that when a man is in his power, he can better provide for everyone around him.
Yeah.
But we're living in a society where the man's expected to sacrifice everything.
Yeah.
So that he's a poor provider to anyone. It's like we're completely inverted.
Yeah. And let's talk about purpose for a second, because that's another area I had wrong. Because I made my soon to be ex the most important thing in my life. And when I did that, the marriage died,
Correct.
So tell me a little bit about purpose and why it's so important to men.
There's different levels of purpose. The initial purpose is, and I hear exactly what you're saying. Oh, my wife and my family is my purpose. I'm like, oh dear, this is not going to end well. And you're like, what do you mean? Well, because if you're not focused on what will help you to grow as a man, right? And I'm not saying that channeling your energy into your relationship in a way that best takes care of them, that's part of what your responsibility is as a man. But ultimately, men come into this world to fulfill some deeper reason. There's a reason for their existence. And for me, that's a divinely inspired purpose. So before, and it's like, there's a path that you need to go on to get to a certain level of self-awareness and clarity and self-belief for the divine purpose to be revealed. So if you're like, my purpose, my purpose is to create, to bring order to chaos, strength to weakness, and to create safe spaces to deeply experience home. And I understood that for me to do that, to bring order to chaos, I needed to become a very powerful man. And to be able to do that, my home is not just my immediate family, it's to create a community. In fact, a new model for humanity in the way that we could relate to each other. So my best taking care of that trajectory will bring me into the financial success, will build me into a continual pursuit of optimizing, enhancing my abilities and how I relate to the world. It's constantly requiring me to lead into greater potentiality. From that position of internal congruent alignment, right, I come into my power. When I'm not in alignment with my truth and where I need to be, what I know deep in my heart, what I'm meant to be doing, and instead, if I'm letting fear, if I'm letting uncertainty, if I'm letting other people's perspectives and opinions pull me away from that internal alignment, then what ends up happening is you start to feel a greater resentment for those people that you're meant to be serving. You feel increasingly less resourceful and less able to contribute. And if you think, so often men start off powerful and end up weak in relationships because they give more and more of themselves away, and they give up more of their internal alignment away because they don't have that internal authority, and they're not orientated around their North Star. They're in pursuit of acceptance, love, appreciation from the feminine. So what ends up happening is once a man truly aligns with his North Star and he knows why he's here, he begins to become more successful, more fulfilled, more confident. His esteem goes up, and that becomes magnetic to wealth and to polarity with his feminine. From that place of his empowered magnetism and his success, he then takes care of everyone. He takes pride in taking care of those closest to him. But it's orientated around his empowerment and his thriving, and then that thriving pours from the full cup into those closest to him. And the more that he increases his power and the magnitude of this ability to create life with intention and in his terms, the more people he can take care of. It extends beyond his immediate family and himself into his tribe and wider community. So that comes from that deep yearning of often a man's path, or what he's been in, his pain, that when he restores that, it makes him more whole within. That wholeness, that completeness that he discovers then creates the outer world reflection of that inner harmony. So a man must orientate around his mission to bring himself into his completeness and wholeness. And this is something we covered in the last session, if you might remember. And from that place, that outer world comes into that reflection, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, one of the examples of that always sticks out to me is like this. You had in and I'd say probably World War I, World War II, where men were lining up to go to war, right? Uh-huh. And while the new wife, the new bride, doesn't want him to go, she understands that he has to. And if he actually said, "I'm not going to go to war, I'll stay here with you," she would lose respect for him, right? Right. Uh-huh. So that was a really interesting thing. And the thing is, when men are in their purpose, they're a lot more attractive and magnetic, aren't they? Like it's 100%. Yeah.
And then so there's a tension that when you find a woman that you really love, to want to give as much as you can to the woman, and you need to do so without giving up your purpose. But a big part of it, another thing which we didn't really talk about, is that many men relate to women in a way that a boy relates to their mother. Right? They don't see a woman in a romantic way because they were raised primarily by their mothers, because they didn't have a strong fatherly influence that can teach them how a man relates to a woman outside the context of a mother-son relationship. How to be sexual, how to attract a woman, how to be a dominant lead, how not to be submissive, but to be confident in your leadership. So it all comes back to the presence of fathers in relationships. And so much of society, again, is telling us that women are fine and can do better, without fathers. But in reality, if you look at pretty much every metric, the children do not do well later in life if they don't have the presence of that the fatherly presence that can offer discipline and guidance, and again, bring the boy into manhood. So we see this generational repetition of disempowerment that, needs to turn around if we want to have a society that's not devolving into chaos.
Yeah. So it's not that difficult for men to stand out these days, is there? Even if you're still just working on being a high value man, an empowered man, you're just working on it is going to make you stand out from everyone else. Because you just look at everyone else out there today that just, we're in an interesting place right now. And one of the questions I asked earlier, I don't think you got to, was like, how do you describe like the feminine version, and what do you call a feminine version of an empowered man?
So an empowered, let's just say it's the empowered woman. If extraordinary men are rare, the truly, let's call it, natural expression of the feminine is equally rare. And the good thing is we can attract to each other because we respond. But, they say a man needs to become hard so he can create an environment where the feminine can be soft. And so the woman's role, if she like, is as she gets older, is how does she remain soft and open when she's been taken advantage of, when she's been mistreated or abused, when she's, how does she remain soft and open and receptive to the masculine presence? See, a lot of women lead with expectation, not with contribution, not with how do I invest my love into this man. It's what can the man do for me?
So much expectation, right?
Yeah, before I'll
Yeah.
decide to open up. And then they don't even know how to open up. If you look to what's happening to masculine's been invited to become more emotional and more open, yet the feminine's not being invited to do the same. It's the opposite. She's being invited to stand into authority and leadership. So a woman so it's said that women need to preserve, where men need to be made, So a woman's born with beauty. She's born with softness. She's born with her playfulness and her vitality and so many different things. She needs to orientate herself in terms of her esteem. She wants to be appreciated, acknowledged. And so the feminine version is a woman who's receptive to the masculine, a woman who wants to pour her joy, her radiance, her happiness into, through her receptivity, into the family, into connection, So that receptivity and openness is the core of the feminine, where the masculine is penetrative dominance. So she's often more in a submissive nature. This doesn't mean that she can't have moments of, contribution of her opinions, her ideas, or any of that sort of stuff. No, but she's orientated around the family connection. And if you look at the rite of passage, men's rite of passage is to come into dominance, to overcome fear. A woman's rite of passage is to go from I to we. A woman's rite of passage is birth, is to give birth and then to pour her love in a selfless act towards the family. Yet what we have is so many women in their entitlement and increasingly selfish, and I'm not willing to give up any of that, which runs counter to what it actually would give her fulfillment. And in the same way, so she's pouring into family. In the same way, a man, when he's in his power, he wants to provide the abundance and the success and share that. And he actually gets enjoyment from the woman receiving. Yet women are taught to not receive without, this other expectation first. They're not taught to be open. They're saying, I'll only be open and submissive when a man's this, and this. Yet that's not going to be attractive to a man who's in his power. He's like, I know what I have to offer. I know that I can provide. I know I can protect. I know. So I'm looking for a woman who has that radiance, that feminine magnetism, and who's wanting to invest and complement my life as well as me complement hers, not this weird, distorted way that so much of today's society is guiding women.
Yeah. And I shared with you this quote that I saw today. It was like, women are taught what to expect from men, but not how to treat them.
Right.
And men are taught how to treat a woman, but not what to expect from them.
That was a quote I was looking on my phone before, that exact point.
And one of the places that men are struggling, and I know I do, is setting boundaries. That's because that's masculine. But when you don't know what to expect, like, it gets to the point where you're just like, I could see myself, because, clearly the relationship I was in wasn't on a great trajectory for the past few years, if we ended this spot. But the amount that I was willing to accept was so minimal, because I was in a place of like fear and scarcity, just in my wounding. And I just had no idea how much my childhood experiences were affecting my relationship. I had no idea how much my relationship with my mother was. But I'm so grateful for you, because like you've cleaned up like almost all of it in like a month. It's like crazy. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about like, my coaching gift, and I don't know how I do it, but my gift is I hold the frequency of alignment. Wherever anybody is, I can hold the frequency right above them and pull them up to it. Like, what is your gift as a coach? And I think you have a story about how you got that, didn't you?
Right. True that. Thank you. So it came in stages. So the initial alignment towards his coaching path was shortly about 3 or 4 weeks after my mum's death. And it gave me access to what I call the field. For the first time, some could call it divination or channeling or this sort of stuff. For me, it's just a supersensory ability that allows me to read the field. I can read environments, I can read people, I can feel blockages, obstructions. And over time, I just became very aware of how to unpack the information that was in the field. So initially I might start off, I feel a blockage here. or I feel something here. And I'm like, I just get curious. And then I start to ask questions. Now, initially this field, this divination came online. Then about 3 to 4 years later, I then had a Kundalini awakening where I then had even greater awareness of the subtle energy realm. And so my unique gift in coaching is I can read the field, means I can read the subconscious mind. I can read distortions that are inside the field. And I can also bring both energetic influence, you could call it intervention. So if there's, just say you have, example, in your relationship, there's a lack of safety. I could locate where it originated, just say it's a moment in childhood. I could then bring in the resource of safety to that moment such that there is no time. I change the timeline trajectory of your existence such that in the present moment, you have a different relationship to the outside world because it's no longer based on the decisions that were made from having less than perfect information. So essentially, what I do is I shift timelines, I shift trajectories, I shift identities is really what I do. But to shift the identity, there's in NLP, on the top NLP I learned, there's these logical levels of change. So most coaches will talk about changing behaviors, changing environment, changing strategies, competencies. Even some will talk about changing emotions, and some might even talk about changing beliefs. The levels behind that are the identity and what I call the field. So the field includes systemic relations. And that's, for instance, who am I in relationship to my family? Am I trying to fulfill any pain and trauma, intergenerational trauma that's being passed down? Another one would be I'm Australian or I'm Irish or I'm Native American or, and am I trying to resolve any traumas from that lineage? So I also studied NLP Marin, which is a form of holographic NLP where I feel in my body what's happening in that person's reality and field. I studied family constellations. So that's some of that, healing intergenerational trauma. I've studied elements of internal family systems for the different parts and how they're related to inside of you. But ultimately what I do is I combine all of those and I invented some things that got downloaded really, where I started to be able to understand that so much of distortion, as I mentioned before, is just because there's a lack of fullness of information. And so we make the best decisions we can. But there's also not just that information is not just mental, cognitive thoughts and processes. It's a lack of a frequency. So what I understood is that I could start to narrow in on a distortion, see what was missing in terms of the frequency, and then I could bring that frequency, whether it's safety, love, acceptance, and then spontaneously things would resolve. And then it's about future pacing or choosing what is going to be your preferred experience and give more choice than the limitations that the mind had previously.
Yeah, and having gone through that, those shifts are so just monumental that I feel like I've never seen reality before. Like you're looking at everything, and I think you were laughing at me when I started going like this. I looked around the room and I'm like, what just changed?
Lights up in here.
Something changed around here, So tell me, I'm sure there's a lot of men that are listening right now that are experiencing this situation. What's your guidance for them? And then how can they get your support?
So many men will try to solve the problems at the level of thinking that created the problem in the first place. You don't realize that you don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, so many men have to reach a point of pain where it's intolerable before they finally take action. So my invitation is to those men is if you're experiencing stuckness, overwhelm, if you feel that you're not the authority in your relationship, if you feel that the best years are not in front of you, you're no longer inspired by life, your energy is diminishing over time, if you feel as if you've just gone through a life crisis, whether it's the end of a business, the end of a relationship, and you're at a decision point and you don't have clarity in where you're going, then this is where I think I can provide immense value. And I'm not here to tell you what you should be doing. I'm really here to invite some self-awareness of what's really important to you and what do you stand for now. And if you could recreate yourself, if you could subscribe to the idea that men are made, who would you create yourself to become? And how could you step outside of the indoctrination and the frame that you might unconsciously find yourself in without awareness? What are you conforming to from societal indoctrination about what a man is, what a woman is, and how could you just, so much of it just begins with a decision that you want something better in life, that you don't need to tolerate shit circumstances, and then just imagination and curiosity. Well, if I didn't need to be constrained by these limitations, who might I become? And then just set yourself on an empowered trajectory to start building that version of yourself. Start deciding. So I have this rite of passage that I've created, which starts for what is a man, what is a masculine frame is how I talk about it. Then once you've got this awareness of a masculine frame, how do I go about building that? And then what do I align that with? And I think that's a journey everyone needs to go on as a man, is recognize that you probably weren't given all the lessons that you needed from your father. You're probably conforming to a feminized frame of authority, and you're probably, pedestaling them, and you're probably still seeking external validation and love. Once you start to recognize that you truly are the creator, the master of your own destiny, then, and you realize that men are made, that you can optimize your experience of life, then what would be your strategy for doing that? And that's where I feel that having a coach can be an epic contribution towards that trajectory.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how do you work? I know you do one-on-one. Do you also do group work? Like, how can people engage you?
So, I have an online community with Sovereign Brotherhood. I do one-to-one coaching. I also run retreats. I have a community project that I'm building here, but a retreat called Call of the Wild, which is like a form of initiation. And so if people want to reach me, you can find me Sovereign Wealth on Instagram. You can we'll probably point some communication details below. Look up Sovereign Brotherhood on School. The School community is a free community to join. And if you want to reach out and have a quick, 15-minute coffee chat, then we can do so. I'm sure there'll be a link that I can provide you there as well.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Awesome. And is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that we haven't covered?
Men are beautiful. Men are beautiful. One of the biggest things that I needed to do when I broke out of
that feels weird. That feels weird. I know that to be true, but it feels weird to hear that.
Yeah, I didn't. To truly love yourself, you have to love masculinity if you're a man. And so I had subscribed to so much of the shaming of masculinity that didn't give a lot of space. And I can honestly say now I love men. I love myself, and I love the brothers that I have around me. And I needed to love masculinity first. And so men are extraordinary. Great men are extraordinary. Masculinity is aspirational. It's something that healthy, empowered masculinity is such a beautiful and rare thing. And I truly believe that the reclamation of honorable masculinity and the pursuit of that, the aspirational pursuit of becoming an extraordinary man, has the power and is absolutely essential to redirect society towards, something that we can look forward to, rather than, so many of us feel that we're going in the wrong trajectory. I believe it's men's responsibility to turn that ship around and to create something different.
I agree with that. Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. I got some coaching out of this as well, and had a pretty big distinction on masculine frame today. That was something locked into place today. So that was awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing. It was great talking to you today. If anybody else who's following me, if you're interested in this work, it will change your life. Because my magic is helping you close the gap from between where you are, you want to be. You want to go make more money. That's move your business. That's my magic. His magic is turning you into the man you never knew you could be. And it's pretty amazing work. So I encourage you all to check out. But thanks again for being here today, Nathan. I will talk to you soon.
Look forward to our next call, mate. And maybe for you to come to Tulum sometime soon.
Yes. Let's put that on the calendar.
Cheers, mate. Great talking.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. This is Transform. I'm your host, Jason Drees. If you want to get an experience of coaching, you can go to freeintrosession.com. And actually, let's make this session a little bit useful. Send it to somebody who may benefit from hearing it, or leave me a review on the podcast. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.